Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Now let's move on with the level 5. And level 5 we want to code for indirect expenses. So let me take you to where we are doing our Python code. So we've done up to level 4. Now we want to move to indirect expenses. So let me just try to uncomment direct expenses out, and then I will comment out the earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. So within our level 4, the level 5, where we want to get the indirect expenses, let me just take you back to first the Excel workbook. When you check down here, we have indirect expense, just after indirect income. So we have here indirect expense as a total with the blank row from period actual to total last year column. So that's why when you check on this our code, you can see here we've said that level 4.lock level 4.shape in bracket, in square bracket 0, then the bracket is equal to indirect expense, comma, then indirect expenses. So the first this first indirect expense here as a string, this one is for category, and the next one is for ledger, and this other 0 is for the numerative numerical columns, which we have how many columns? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So when you check up here, we have period actual is 1, we have period budget is 2, we have YTD actual is 3, YTD budget is 4, period last year is 5, YTD last year is 6, total last year is 7, and then we also had another column here for sub-ledger. So the sub-ledger is the last 0 that we have here. So we are trying to insert a row of which we'll want to make it a blank row with the subheading indirect expenses. So that's why we are having this line of code, level 4.lock, level 4.shape, in square bracket 0, then we have indirect expenses, then we have the 8 zeros. So let me just try to print the level 4. We see what we have. So print bracket level 4. So first let me try to comment out this other level 4 that we had just printed. So I want to print this one down here. We'll run this code again. So the period is 1, and then financial year in reviews 2017. So this is what we have as indirect expense. So you can see the last row here, label row 7, we have indirect expense, and then we have these other zeros running from period actual to total last year column. It's running up to the sub-ledger. So we've inserted a blank row, but since we have numerical columns, that's why we are adding the zero. Supposing that this these other columns were not numerical columns, so we'll insert blank values here. Like now we could have used we could have used something like this. Instead of using 0, we use strings, but in between we just create a blank space or just a space. But now because we are using numerical columns, we use zeros. So again, down here, our next line of code, remember after having these zeros, at some point we'll do away with the zeros, so we just have the blank row. So now we'll still have the zeros until we reach the final product, which will be profit before tax, the PBT. But apparently now we must have the zeros until we reach that last line of code, rather the last row where we have the PBT. So the next line of code here, we are saying that indirect expense is equal to P&L dot P&L, rather P&L in bracket P&L category is equal to indirect expense. So when I print out here, rather when I print down here, you can see what we have as indirect expense. Print indirect underscore expense. Remember, our indirect expenses are being read from the Excel workbook. So we are supposed to have these values here, the values we are seeing here. So these are our indirect expenses. So this is what we have as indirect expense, and it is being read from our Excel workbook. So coming down here, you are saying that indirect expense is equal to direct expenses dot group by category, ledger, and sub-ledger. So we are grouping all the data frame in terms of ledger, sub-ledger, and category. Let me just do away with this, or let me just so down here we have total indirect expense, and total indirect expense is the same principle that we had used earlier. We are saying indirect expense indirect expense dot log in square bracket total indirect expense is equal to indirect expenses. Then we are putting all the numerical columns within the square bracket, and then we are summing the numerical columns. So down here again we have indirect expense is equal to indirect expense dot replace. So we are replacing the null values with total indirect expense, and then we are also resetting the index. But before we replace the null values, let me just try to print down here what we have as indirect expense. So So this is 1, this is 2017. So you can see down here now we have a category, we have ledger, and then we also have the sub ledger, and we also have the period actual. We have the period budget, YTD actual, YTD budget, period last year, YTD last year, and the total last year. So this is what we have as our indirect expense. So again, down here we are saying indirect expense is equal to indirect expense dot replace not a number of values or the null values with total indirect expense, and then set the index, and then indirect expense is equal to indirect expense dot drop index. Then indirect expenses is equal to indirect expenses dot group by category, by ledger, by sub ledger. Then we are summing the numerical columns, then we are resetting the index. So let me just print down here what we have as the indirect expense after grouping by category and ledger and the sub ledger, and then resetting the index. So the period is 1 on the financial year and reviews 2017. So this is what we have as indirect expense. Remember, we are having this. We are having a lengthy data frame, rather not lengthy, but with quite a number of rows, because we also have sub ledger. So the sub ledger is what making the indirect expense to be quite a long one. So supposing we did not have the sub ledger, we'll just group this other ledger and with the category, and have quite a few rows as opposed to what we have now. So let me just try to show you that by examples. So I'll bring this one down. So instead of having sub ledger here, I will do away with the sub ledger so that you can see what. So again, I will run this code. Period is 1. Financial year and reviews 2017. So without the sub ledger, we'll be having 11 rows from 0 to 10. When we have the sub ledger, we'll have quite a number of rows. So I'll just have to take it back. Let me just take it back for the time being. So again, down here we are saying that we're saying that level 5 is equal to pd.concat level 4. We are concatenating two data frames, the data frame for indirect expense and the data frame for level 4. So let's bring down level 5, see what we have. So this is creating an error. Then let me try to rerun again. And then we've seen I'm trying to do a lot of printing because it's easier to debug your Python code as you move on, as opposed to writing a very long code and then trying to debug it after finishing all your lines of code. So it's good you write a code and then debug the lines of code as you move on. So that's why you see I'm trying to do a lot of printouts. So when we get error, we correct as we move on. So the period number we are still using January, then 2017. Again, if we use February or March or which other month, we'll still have results. So this is what we have as a level 5. So now with the level 5 we have a category, then or rather within that column of category we have sales volume, we have sales, we have cost of sales, we have gross margin, we have direct expenses, and net margin, we have indirect income, and then we have indirect expenses. So this one with zeros towards the other columns, so where we'll have the heading, and then we have these other indirect expenses, of which we have different ledger categories as bank, communication, we have general expenses, we have leisure professional, we have manpower, we have office and maintenance, we have rent. So it's long because we still have this other sub-ledger column. So the moment we'll do away with the sub-ledger column, I will not have this lengthy rows of indirect expenses. So it should not worry you why we are having a lot of rows of indirect expenses, because at some point I will not have them after doing away with the sub-ledger. So we'll stop at that. So when we come back, we'll do level 6, and level 6 will be talking about earnings before interest, depreciation and tax. And I'll still urge you to share my video with your friends, and if you haven't subscribed, please do. And for those who have subscribed, please Rather, thanks a lot for your support, and please do share my videos and share your comments as well of how we can do better code for this PNL coding. So thanks a lot for watching, and let's meet again in this video.